Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy."
Hi, I'm Jacob.
Hi, I'm Nina.
Hi, I'm Mike.
And this is the Fig Tree Podcast.
So today we're talking about the book of Job. But first, why don't we check in? Jacob, how are you today?
I am doing good. I had a bit of an interesting week with my dog. She had some health issues.
Oh no.
Went to the vet a couple times, but she's doing just fine now. So we're happy about that. Just looking forward to Pentecost. Very exciting.
How about you, Mike?
Super busy week with inspections and all kinds of different meetings and stuff like that. We have a bunch of stuff going on this weekend. We have the volunteer appreciation lunch, so I'm excited about that. And Pentecost.
Well, I had a really fun week. I know Jacob did this as well on a different day, but one of our parishioners, actually, he was once our senior warden, is the executive producer of a movie coming out on Halloween. So it's the 5th installment of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And on Tuesday, I was able to go down near the USS Midway, which is now a floating museum, and watch them film 3 scenes. And it was absolutely hysterical.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was a really fun time. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. What a fun time! So go see Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I believe you can find it on streaming platforms.
Absolutely.
So,
Organic
there's
Intelligence
four of
is
them, and there will be this one.
Organic Intelligence is coming out this Halloween.
Yeah. Well, I am very excited for today because we've finally reached one of my favorite portions of the Old Testament.
The wisdom literature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love the wisdom literature. The wisdom literature, it includes Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job. Some argue that the Song of Songs could be included in it, as well as in the Apocrypha or Deuterocanonical books, the Wisdom of Solomon. But the wisdom literature is just excellent. It's all about living in God's world, and it's richly kind of philosophical. It's in dialogue with itself. So what do you all think of the wisdom literature? What have been your impressions on reading it?
Well, at the risk of sounding superficial, it's very poetic and beautiful and inspiring. Even in Job, there's just some amazing, amazing verses. And I know I've often gone to these books to lift out a verse, to add to a note for someone, or especially I know for teachers at Episcopal schools, lifting up some proverbs about raising up children.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Mike?
Well, if I have eyes that see and ears that hear, there's some really beautiful stuff in there. If I pay attention and God speaks to me. And gives me direction and guidance and even comforts me in the Old Testament, believe it or not.
Yeah. It's this kind of richly, almost philosophical, not almost, it is philosophical literature. And so my thesis would be this, that the primary purpose of this wisdom literature are actually 2 things. First, it's living well in God's world. So it teaches us what it means to live well. But second, it also teaches us to understand our place in God's world and provides ways of looking at that.
So each wisdom book gives a different perspective than others.
Yeah, and none of the wisdom books are trying to provide a complete picture, but rather they're meant to be read in conversation with each other. Perhaps the most important book to contextualize Job is the book of Proverbs.
Yeah, the book of Proverbs describes the world in a way that was the kind of the common understanding of the ancient world. If you act according to wisdom, things will go well for you. But if you don't, then things will go poorly. That's kind of like the common way of seeing Proverbs. How have you guys experienced the book of Proverbs?
So Terry and I, for a while, almost a whole year, would read a Proverbs a day. And it's very enlightening. It's a very great way to start your day, and it gives you guidance and direction, and even lifts you up sometimes. I highly recommend it. You know, it's like reading the Psalms a day. It's just something to kind of pep you up and tells you what to do or what not to do.
Yeah.
So it's not like you have to read it from beginning to end. You can just kind of close your eyes and point, put your finger down, and there you have it.
Yeah, I like direction and guidance, but you know, one at a time is good.
Absolutely.
It's definitely possible, to read it not from front to back. I mean, they all stand on their own in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Or start in the middle, go to the end, and start in the middle and go to the other end.
There you go. Well, in many ways, the book of Job seeks to answer, or at least address, the key problem raised by conventional wisdom, like what we find in Proverbs. Why is it that sometimes the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer? Even more importantly, is God still just in a world where bad things happen to good people?
Yeah, one of the great things, or one of the things about the book of Proverbs is like this mentality is still in our own world, right? Like we think about, let's say somebody's poor or somebody's rich, right? And we often think, well, if somebody's poor, we think, well, what did they do to get into the situation that they're in? And
or
if
not do.
Exactly. And if somebody's rich, we think, well, they must have done some really, right things. And I think in some ways that's true, right? Like we can certainly mess up our own lives, and we can certainly make good decisions that help them go well. But one of the problems is when you go into that kind of macro level and start saying, well, this is generally why things happen. Like this is always why things happen. It's a rule. If you do good, then good things will happen. If you do bad, bad things will happen. And the book of Job complexifies that. It says, well, this is not true. So now we don't always do this, but I think introducing some background to Job is going to be very helpful for us to understand it.
So we don't know who wrote the book of Job or exactly when it was written, but it was likely written sometime between the 7th and 4th century BCE. But the book of Job is intentionally written to sound older than it is. Most of the book sounds like it was written in ancient Hebrew, but we know that it was written later because it uses phrases and words that appeared much later in time.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like if someone tried to write a book in Elizabethan English today. Inevitably, even if they do a really good job, there will be some tells when the author accidentally uses a word or phrase that is modern. It reminds me, there's a story my mother-in-law would tell where she was in a Pentecostal church. They'll give prophecies and stuff in those kind of churches. And she said there was this lady who would always give her prophecy, and she would go, "Thus saith the Lord." And she would always speak in Elizabethan English. I thought that was really funny.
Wow. So in Job, one of the tells is that there are occasional influences of Aramaic, which didn't begin to influence the Hebrew language until the 4th and 5th centuries BCE. Mm-hmm. One of the most interesting parts of the composition of Job, however, is that frame story. That is, the story at the beginning and end of the book are much older than the rest of the book. The author of Job took this old story, which potentially for centuries was passed down orally, and inserted into it a bunch of rich and beautiful poetry.
Mm-hmm. So the frame story isn't like totally the author's point. Really, the meat of the book is the poetry. And the poetry is all a meditation on the question which is raised by that story. Is God still just when the righteous suffer?
The book of Job begins by introducing us to the main character of the story.
There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil.
Now, the book brings us into God's heavenly court, and one of the heavenly beings, called the Satan, which means the accuser or adversary, they begin discussing Job. And after God praises Job's righteousness, the accuser accuses Job, asserting that he's really only following God because God has blessed him.
So he plays the devil's advocate?
Yes, you could say that. So God, in response to Satan's accusation, gives him permission to do what he wants with all that Job has. So Satan takes everything from Job, all his property and his flocks and his children even. Now, you would think that he would curse God after all of this, but instead...
Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I come from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord."
Then Satan asserts to God that Job only responded this way because he had stayed healthy himself. So God allows Satan to do what he wants, so long as he doesn't kill Job. So even more is taken from Job. He is struck with sores all over his body. And his wife says, "Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job still remains faithful to God. Wow.
Ouch. So far, what do we think about this?
You don't really want to ask me that question. So, Job is one of the books that I've read in the Bible more than any, because it's just, I'm dumbfounded by it. I'm curious by it. I struggle with this problem of Satan and God playing video games with my life, and sitting up there and taking wagers and bets and things like that. And I understand that. What I've come to understand that in that time that was common in a lot of the other writings and religions, right?
Yeah.
So I've come to grips with it, but it's still I want to say that my Jesus, my God, my Holy Spirit, is not going to sit up there and judge me that way, and I'm going to have those reactions.
Yeah.
And we'll get into it later, but most of my pain is self-inflicted. So it's more about grace and mercy.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So like what you just brought up is really important, I think, because this is why it's useful to start with the fact that the frame story is older than the rest of the book, because really the meat of the book is really the meditation of it, and the story is kind of like a convenient way of getting to the meat of this. So it's not necessarily asserting that this is what God does, just sits up there and gambles with Satan about our lives.
Let's see if we can get Jacob to fall today.
Right. Exactly.
I'm going to give you $10.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. But it does seem immensely unfair. So after this, the story moves out of the older story and into the dialogues between Job and his three friends. And I think the initial response of his friends is actually the best response that you could have when your friend is suffering. Mike, you want to read that initial response that they have?
Yes. Now when Job's three friends heard of all these troubles that had come upon him, each of them set out from his home. Eliphaz, the Temanite, Bildad, the Shuhite, and Zophar, the Naamathite, they met together to go and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept aloud. They tore their robes and threw dust in the air upon their heads. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great.
I think this is really the way to deal with suffering with when somebody is suffering. What do you guys think?
They started out so great.
Right?
and so I read this book by Rabbi Kushner, the Why Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Exactly.
Right? And it goes into all these things, right? And Job's friends are going to go there where you shouldn't go, right? Instead of just staying and accepting and loving and serving and doing what Job needed and just listen and being shoulders to cry on, we'll see that they end up opening their mouths.
Yeah.
But now they're being really good
Right
friends,
now they're
aren't
being
they?
great
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah.
Great examples.
They're not trying to analyze it.
What
or-
our job is to do.
Yeah, exactly. Just walk alongside him and just be there and be present with him and to mourn with him.
Right. And that's what I learned from Rabbi Kushner's book was that I don't need to explain why your son died or this horrible thing has happened. You know, I don't need to justify it. I don't need to blame you or tell you why it happened to you. And I just need to listen like they're doing now, right? And to love you and be
Amen.
there.
Nice, Mike.
Yeah. But then they open their mouths.
They become human.
But then the largest portion of the rest of the book revolves around Job's friends debating with Job as to the nature of his suffering. The entire time, Job maintains his innocence, that he is righteous and that he did not cause his own suffering. But his friends maintain a single point: God is just.
Eliphaz, for example, asserts, "Think now, who that was innocent ever perished? And where were the upright cut off? As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they're consumed. Can mortals be righteous before God? Can human beings be pure before their Maker? Even in his servants he puts no trust, and his angels he charges with error. How much more those who live in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed like a moth?"
Job maintains that he has remained righteous, and he complains to God. His friend Bildad responds,
Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right? If your children sinned against him, he delivered them into the power of their transgression. If you will seek God and make supplication to the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, surely then he will rouse himself for you and restore you to your rightful place.
Job still maintains his innocence, but shows how this affects him. Earlier he regrets that he was ever even born, and now he says that he loathes his life.
Zophar, too, responds to Job and says, "If you direct your heart rightly, you will stretch out your hands towards him. If iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and do not let wickedness reside in your tents. Surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be secure and will not fear."
So the central point of Job's friends is clear. God's world is just, and so if we suffer, we have only ourselves to blame. So what do we think about these assertions of Job's friends?
Well, so God promises to love us, and we have these, not contracts, what's the word I'm looking for? Covenants with God, right? But it never promises that our lives are going to be perfect and we're going to be happy,
Right.
We're going to have lives, and we're supposed to have talked with God, right? I have this thing that I got from my sponsor, Skip, because I have self-inflicted pain, and I live in that for a long, long time, and then I'm pretty happy, and my life's pretty good because of God, right? But like Job said in the beginning, God gives, he can take away. But Skip would always tell me this thing when I would get all self-pity and go, oh, she left me, and nobody loves me, and I think I'm going to go eat some worms. So he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was dying. He was in hospice. And I go, just like you, why you? And he looks at me and he goes, why not me?
Right.
Because I get to go home and be with Jesus. You have to stay here and put up with all this stuff.
That's right.
And I could go on all day and talk about
Yeah.
Job's friends, but I said what I needed to say about them.
Yes. Well, and I think we've got to take Job's friends seriously in a lot of ways. Like, obviously the book is leading us to make a different conclusion, but it dwells on what they say so long because I think it's a point that's out there, and they don't just straw man it. It's like, they're making points that I've heard people make in Christian churches about, can mortals be righteous before God? Nobody's pure. Everyone's sinful, and therefore we all deserve what's coming to us. I've heard people make that point. How do we respond to that?
Why not me?
Sure, yeah.
And to always look where God is making new life. Because where there is error, there is grace and mercy. Where there is loss, there is always something new coming.
Right.
Right. And not to sound like a broken record, but I play God a lot, right? So sometimes I need to be put in my place, or things allowed to happen, so I can go, oh, God really is running the show.
Sure,
so,
yeah.
And Grandpa always used to say, if you want God to laugh, tell him your plans for the day.
So true. So time and time again, Job responds to his friends and maintains that he is innocent. And over time, we can see that Job's situation affects him. He expresses his frustration and anger at God. Why should he suffer when he did nothing to deserve it? Finally, he demands an answer from God. Oh, that I had one to hear me. Here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary. So God responds to Job. First, a man named Elihu comes around and rebukes Job for questioning God, maintaining God's justice, and condemning any self-righteousness on our part. But finally, God shows up and answers Job.
Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determines its measurements, surely you know, or who stretched the line upon it.
And for 2 chapters, God details all of the ways in which he holds all things together, chronicling the vast complexity of God's world. It goes into all of these things like, the sun and the moon and the goats and the grass and all of these things. Like, you can't possibly understand all that goes into the inner workings of the universe. And what's funny too is that, like, now in the 21st century, having moved, having been a long time since the book of Job, we know a lot more about the world, which only makes us even more like, whoa, I remember seeing have you ever seen the video of I don't know the science terms, the thing that like carries the protein on the RNA or something, like, and it's like little legs on the molecular level, and it's...
Is it mitochondria?
I don't know.
Okay, I don't know.
I shouldn't venture into science. It's not my field. But it's so interesting because it's like, wow, I mean, at a molecular level, I mean, this just immensely intricate, crazy stuff is happening. And how could we possibly understand all of this? How can we understand atoms and quarks and quantum physics and all of this? Like, we can't comprehend all that goes into the world.
So I really like the part where it says gird up your loins like a man. So growing up, my dad would say, put on your big boy pants and toughen up, kid.
So the Job answers.
Job answers, see, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once. I will not answer twice, but will proceed no further.
Then
Wise
God,
answer.
God describes these two great beasts, the behemoth and the leviathan. They are these magnificent, terrible, and amazing creatures with great power.
What are they?
Well, different people have thought different things. So what do you think they are? Why do you think God mentions them?
Well, it seems that the behemoth represents the land and the leviathan represents the sea.
Dinosaurs and dragons.
There's dinosaurs in the Bible, yeah. It does. The Leviathan does have a striking resemblance to a plesiosaur, Loch Ness monster. Yeah, So there are these interesting beasts. The behemoth, like Mother Nina said, is a land creature. So it talks about eating grass like ox and shaking the trees. And then it talks about the Leviathan being this sea beast. And it says, can you draw out the Leviathan with a fishhook? What do you think, Mike? Could you draw out the Leviathan with a fishhook?
It depends. Am I using you for bait?
For the listener, if you didn't know, Mike is in fact a fisherman. Yeah.
But he does correct himself when he pretends that he's God, right,
Yeah,
Mike?
that's right. That's
so
right.
I'm not
I'm
thinking
no
this is going to
longer
work.
running the show.
Even with Jacob as bait, I don't think you're pulling that Leviathan up.
Well, God speaks of these two great beasts, and my opinion is that they are a metaphor for the vastness and multifacetedness of creation itself. The same beasts, which are beautiful and magnificent, and God says as such, can also be terrible and destructive. And this is true of the natural world, right?
Yeah, that's our experience.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have this beautiful mountain that we can all be admiring, and then a landslide happens, and there's terrible death and destruction.
I remember my mom we lived in Missouri, and there's a lot of thunderstorms there. And every time we had a thunderstorm, my mom liked to go and sit on the porch and watch it, just because it's beautiful. The lightning is gorgeous. But once it gets too close, then you've got to go inside.
Exactly. But it is magnificent, and the electricity in the air, but dangerous as well.
Yeah.
And I have that same thing with the ocean. I have that relationship where it's the most calming place in the world for me, right? And I can be really, really super serene and close to God, and this place is beautiful. But in an hour, you can have 20-foot seas and 40-mile-an-hour winds and be scared for your life, and it's scary, right? So it turns from this really calm thing into this horrible beast.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
So, Mike, have
Very
you ever
powerful.
seen a mermaid? Just checking.
No.
Okay.
I heard one once, but I
Really?
never saw one.
Oh,
Interesting.
fascinating.
Right.
Fascinating.
In all of this, God's point is clear. When we see the vastness and complexity of creation, we understand the impossibility of a finite human understanding God's decisions. So simply put, some questions are simply unanswerable because we couldn't possibly comprehend the answer.
So finally, Job sees God's point, and he answers.
I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you will declare me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes.
The book ends with Job's friends being put into their place and with Job's fortunes being restored.
And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before.
So Job is now blessed more than ever before, and it says that Job died old and full of days.
So it's a nice ending to the story. And we can be tempted to interpret that ending. Remember, this is the older story. We could be tempted to interpret that ending by saying, well, look, Job did well.
He persevered.
He passed the test. And so God blessed him to reward him, right? And if we do that, we miss the entire point of the book.
He won the bet.
Right. Lest we undo every message the book had given us thus far, the story gives us no indication that this is a reward for Job. Job's restored fortunes are as much a mystery as his suffering. As Mike and I like to say, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
So that's the book of Job. It is, in many ways, an immensely comforting book, but in other ways, it's perplexing and mystifying. So what are some of the conclusions that we draw from the book?
Well, I think one of the things that makes this book so interesting and compelling is that there's layers of the onion to peel off, right? And so there's so many different ways to approach it. But first, I think the primary conclusion we draw from the book of Job is that we cannot understand why suffering happens, or indeed why it doesn't. But we must still trust that God is all-knowing and is just.
So when we suffer, it's fruitless to probe into the suffering to find its cause. In the eternal words of Forrest Gump, it happens. Well, of course, he didn't say it happens. He said another word, but for the sake of our podcast, I'll just say it.
There we go. Perfect.
When we succeed and prosper, it's also fruitless to try to find its cause as well.
Job teaches us to learn to be humble, trusting, and content in any state we find ourselves.
Yeah, it's so good in many ways because it's just this absolute humility that we should have. Because we don't know, we can't grasp why. We can only grasp that things are. And so we just have to roll with the punches.
Why not me?
Exactly.
So I like to say that God in general is unfigureoutable, especially for my human mind, right? So I know no matter what that he loves me and he's always there. That he made me to love him and always be there. And a lot of times I'm not. But that's what I'm here for. Is just like when he made Adam and Eve, to be with him, to walk with him, to talk with him, to have companionship.
Yeah.
You know? And I want to bring up another point. So you brought up Forrest Gump, but I'm not going to curse. I would have rather you said poop. But there's a line in now I'm not going to remember it, but there's a line in Forrest Gump.
Is it about the box of chocolates?
Well, that's a great one as well. But life is like a box of chocolates. We can't really figure it out. But I'm going to have to
You get
pass.
what you get, and you don't have a fit. I think I can think of plenty of situations where I would not feel content. Right.
Right. It's easier said than done.
Right. It's impossible in many cases.
Yeah.
But I can still continue to trust God and endure,
Right.
knowing that God will strengthen me.
Yeah. So in many ways, the book of Job is not fully satisfying because our why questions remain completely unanswered. And no matter how much epistemic humility we have, this just continues to be frustrating.
In a Christian interpretation of Job, however, we have a bit more to hold on to for two reasons. The first reason is that whatever the reason is for suffering, we believe that God enters into it himself. Jesus, like Job, is presented in the story, is truly righteous, and yet he suffers. He takes the suffering of humanity onto himself and shares it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's like the key point here, right? Is that we can't understand why, but we can understand that God shares it with us.
Right. And I remembered what I was going to say. So Lieutenant Dan is hanging from the mast of the Bubba, right? And I call them Lieutenant Dan moments. And just like Job, right? You call this a storm? You know? We all question God, right?
Yeah.
But God, I don't know if he enjoys it, but it's still the conversation where we're asking God or telling God, hey, I'm not real happy about this. I don't understand it, you know? And God comforts at least me. I know that he's comforting me and will give me not answers to questions of why bad things happen, but comfort in knowing that God loves me no matter what. And his hand is always going to be there.
Well, through Christ, God understands your feelings, exactly how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And so many of us, you know, will like raise our fist to God and say, you know, why did you take this person from me or whatever it is? And God didn't do that. God is there at your side weeping with you. Yeah. God is sharing your emotion.
Right. This is like when I interned at another church at one point, and one of the administrators there, she was talking to me, and she had gotten pregnant. This was a Pentecostal church, and she lost her baby to a miscarriage, and she said that a well-meaning elder approached her and said, well, you should probably examine your life and determine what sin you committed that caused this to happen.
Oh my gosh, that's such terrible theology.
It is. And I think this is really the good answer of both the book of Job and Jesus, is that we can't do that. You can't do that. You don't know. And the question of why is not answerable, but God is with us anyway.
But I've had times in my life where I have done things,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And I need to learn something. So I need to stop and ask God, what are you trying to tell me? You know?
Sure. Sure.
Well, maybe it's stop drinking. Maybe it's stop smoking. Maybe,
right.
You know, maybe it's stop picking on Jacob.
Yeah.
You know, so there are lessons to learn, I believe, but we don't have to figure out everything. Like I said, if something, especially when it happens to someone else, I don't want to go explain it away. I just want to pat them on the shoulder and let them know that I'm there and what can I do?
Exactly.
And that's like the good reason why all of the wisdom literature is meant to be held in tension with each other. So what you just said like fits with the book of Proverbs, for example, right? Like you do need to learn lessons in life, but in an ultimate way, the answers maybe aren't there. Okay, so those are the 2 points, but there's one more point to make, I think.
So finally, the good news of Job is made even better. At the end, Job's fortunes are restored. And while the book does not portray this as a reward, it hints towards God's true purposes for his world.
We can't understand why, in God's wisdom, anything happens now, good or bad. And I would emphasize that, good or bad. Nor can we understand what will happen next. But God has told us what the end of his wisdom is. Namely, all shall be well. All shall be made right.
And that gives us tremendous hope.
I love that.
Thanks for listening to the Fig Tree Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this podcast on social media so others can join us. We hope that you have a great day, and we'll see you next time on the Fig Tree Podcast.